Good afternoon and welcome to the Rothko Chapel. My name is Emily Whitehurst. I'm the executive director here. I'm going to take on my coat, but hopefully we will be warm in our togetherness this afternoon. The Rothko Chapel is a sacred space. It's dedicated to interfaith understanding and human rights. It was envisioned by its founders, John and Dominique DeMille, to be a place that nurtured reverence and contemplation. It's designed around the murals of Mark Rothko. And the light is a little low today, but for those of you who come here, you'll know that there is so much light in these paintings despite the fact that they appear so dark. And that's one of the mysteries of this place that I'd like people to appreciate. This afternoon, we're delighted to host a Judeo-Christian contemplation meditative experience. And we are grateful to the two guests this afternoon for bringing this program to us. The chapel takes very little credit. We opened the doors, which we would have done anyways. So thank you for being here. Harvey Gordon and Robert Hesse, a Jew and a Catholic, will be teaching what has been endorsed in an open letter from two well-known Jewish Christian contemplatives of method. Harvey Gordon is clinical professor of urology and medical ethics at Baylor College of Medicine. He has taught and practiced since 1967 at Baylor College of Medicine and the Methodist Hospital. Now retired from the practice of urology, he serves on the bioethics committee and the bioethics consultation service at the Methodist Hospital. On a national level, he played leadership roles in the areas of Reformed Jewish liturgy, religious living, adult education, and social action. Robert Hesse holds a Bachelor of Theology and Theology from the University of St. Thomas and a BS in Chemistry and a PhD in Physical Chemistry from St. Louis University. He has led one of the chapel's monthly meditations. He is co-founder of the Contemplative Outreach Network dedicated to interdenominational Christian contemplative prayer. He was inspired by the Gethsemane Trappist Monastery, at the time home to Thomas Merton, and is an ordained Catholic deacon in the Galveston Archdiocese. I will have them take the suburban teaching the method, but it is an honor to welcome you and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Shall we ask everybody to come closer?
Yeah.
This has got to be intimate. But I invite you, if you wish, you can come a little closer.
It's recognize that meditating in a group of friends and acquaintances is a good thing to do. I don't know of any data about meditating among a group of strangers, but I'm not prepared to take the chance. So would you please introduce yourselves to each other and just spend a minute or two telling each other who you are.
We welcome you here, and thank you for coming. This has been an amazing journey for Harvey and for me. I don't think either of us anticipated the journey we would go on, but I wanted to cover some housekeeping items first. You have one sheet handout. At the end, you're going to get a copy of our PowerPoint presentation, which you don't see. You can imagine it up there. They don't have that capability here, but so there's no reason to take notes other than in your thoughts, which we'll talk about. And then at the end, there's a sign-in sheet that if you would like to have an email reminder to you about the follow-up, we're going to have a follow-up session at the Catholic Co-Cathedral here in Houston and at Beth Israel. It's follow-up, trying to encourage a continuing prayer togetherness between the two communities. We'll have, you're probably wondering, well, what can these people do for 3 hours? You'll have breaks, and there are going to be 2 20-minute prayer sessions, and that time will pass quickly because of the way Harvey will explain that. So we'll have a break about a little bit over halfway. We'll have 3 sessions for questions, and then 2 20-minute prayer sessions. If you have to leave early, that's fine. We have examples of books over here that Harvey and I are going to be talking about and comparing between the Jewish and Christian traditions, and it's a marvelous, marvelous similarity. And I wanted to tell you that we'll be covering like 4 different areas. One is going to be images and words, because ultimately, though this is a silent prayer practice, to explain it, we have to start with words, unfortunately. And that will be an interesting exercise. Then we'll talk about the contemplative history, to give you a sense that this is not New Age. This isn't something that got invented yesterday. It's been around in both traditions for thousands of years. Then we'll talk about the methodology and the practice, and in a Judeo-Christian fashion, so it's respectful of both traditions. And then after we've practiced, we'll have a discussion of the potential consequences. I wanted to spend a little time on how we came to the point of getting to know each other. I had been motivated to do this for a couple of reasons. One, I had prejudice expressed against me, and not by the Jewish community, but by my own Catholic community, and not the community, but individuals, creating fear that somehow I was going to try to convert somebody. Well, that's not Catholic teaching, okay? Catholic teaching is you don't have to be Catholic or Christian or theist to go to heaven. So we're not out to convert people, okay? And sometimes it's painted with that broad brush. And so I felt that message wasn't clear to a lot of people. The other motivation was that I had attended a number of interfaith dialogues that used words, which you'd expect. But inevitably, they tend to focus in on not just the common, but also the things that are different. And yet, our common base is God. And the thought was not new to me. I'm a follower of Trappist monk, Father Thomas Keating, and he's been promoting interfaith dialogue with contemplative prayer for some time. But the things he's been doing have mainly been between clergy in different conferences. And basically, this is a form of silent prayer. And I will quote him by saying that he believes that it's in silence there's no dogma. So there is absolutely no reason why we can't pray together in a silent prayer form without dogma, as long as we all enter this in the spirit of open-mindedness and know that we're all seeking to be listening to the same God. The starting point was to talk to Rabbi Karf, and thank goodness he's been so gracious to come today. Rabbi Karf is here with us, as you may know. A blessed soul. And I asked him, well, who do I talk to in the Jewish community? And he immediately told me and introduced me to Harvey. Harvey, on our first meeting, I knew that we had been to the same place. Or, again, words get in the way. The same place had touched both of us. And so we didn't need to talk about different theology or philosophy. There was this sense of meaning between us, and our first meeting was out at the reflective pool. You remember Harvey out here. And it was an amazing experience. And we knew that we needed to get, if we wanted to do this, and Harvey was really very open to this right away, he'll speak for himself on our first discussions. But we knew that we needed to have some authoritative endorsement, because what does Harvey and Bob have to say about this? You know, we wanted some of. And I know Thomas Keating pretty well, and I called him, and he was enthusiastic about endorsing it. And Harvey first introduced me to Daniel Matt, who translated and annotated the Quran. And it's an amazing experience, because we got him on the phone, and the Zohar is so amazingly close to some of the Christian writings that it really touched me. It's the seminal work. And so Daniel Matt was it's a poetic work, and he interprets the symbolism in it and did the translations. And he referred us to Rabbi Elon Goshen Gottstein in Jerusalem. Well, I really believe God has had a hand in this relationship between Harvey and me. It doesn't matter in our minds whether anybody showed up or not. The three of us, Harvey, me, and God, were here already, so it didn't matter. But to show how God was at work at this, I am in the engineering construction business, a consultant. I do earn a living doing other things, and was appointed the project manager on a capital project in Israel to import liquefied natural gas there. At the same time that Daniel Mack recommended we talk to Rabbi Allen. Amazing. And I had never been to Israel. I always wanted to go. And I went over, and while I was there on business, met with Rabbi Allen. And he brought with him a Cistercian nun. I think he was trying to make me feel comfortable, and we met in the old town outside of Tel Aviv and had a kosher dinner. And he was wonderful, and he rattled through 3 or 4 names, and I was writing madly, that were recognized Jewish rabbi contemplatives. And we'll talk about what that means and all, but I had to email him back after I got back to have him spell them for me because I'm not too good at rabbis' names. And one of them was Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. So I got back, and then Harvey started to look for Rabbi Zalman to talk to him. His phone number was unlisted, and he had retired. And we started to realize he was in Boulder, Colorado, and Thomas Keating's in Snowmass, Colorado, at a monastery there. And I looked at Harvey and I said, I'll bet you these two guys know each other. So I called Keating. And he says, oh, I know Rabbi Zalman. He's wonderful. I've got his phone number. So I gave the phone number to Harvey, and then we both talked to Rabbi Zalman, and he is a blessed soul, I want to tell you. And it turns out they did a DVD together, Keating and Zalman, 2 contemplatives walking in a park, sitting on a bench, talking about their traditions. And it's powerful. It's about 30 minutes long. We don't have the electronics to show it here. We would have showed it. But in the follow-up sessions, we'll do that. Harvey, do you want to kind of talk about your experience of this?
Bob called, and I picked up the phone, and he explained who he was and what he was about, and that I had been recommended to him as a Jewish meditator. I told him that it was probably more accurate to describe me as a Jew whose spiritual search involved meditation very deeply. It's true, but my practice has been largely shaped by Jewish language and Jewish worship and Jewish traditions and practices and insights, but not exclusively. As a spiritual seeker, I have also been influenced by the East, by Buddhist teachings and practices, by Hindu practices and teachings as well. But I've rarely, if ever, turned to Christian practices or teachings. And when I think about why, the answer that comes to mind is history. As a Jew, I have no history with Hindus or Buddhists, but I have a 2,000-year history with the Church. And much of that history, for a good 1,500 years, has been one of persecution and anti-Semitism. And it wasn't until 1965 when Pope Paul VI issued an encyclical entitled Nostra Aetate, which is the Latin for "in our time," I believe. And in that, he renounced the historic anti-Semitism of the Catholic Church, and he embraced non-Catholic religions, particularly the Jews, as brothers and sisters in God. And that was certainly welcome news to the Jewish people. But in 1965, I was 31 years old. I had a lot of attitudes at that time that were fairly well congealed and solidified. And some of those attitudes don't yield immediately to apologies and explanations. How much more is 1,500 years than 31 years? So historically and personally, I really didn't expect that I would have much in common with Robert Hesse, who was a deeply religious, seminary-educated, ordained Catholic deacon. But we started to talk, and it didn't take too long until it was pretty clear to me, and I think to both of us, that, we had been walking different paths, but our journeys were really in the same direction. And we sensed that our paths had taken us to the same place. Now, my path was clearly a Jewish path. When I think of what leads me into a meditative state, I'm usually thinking about Jewish symbols and Hebrew words and traditions and understandings of Judaism. But the place it leads me to, that meditative place, is not Jewish. The place that each of us has arrived at by our independent paths is beyond what one would call Jewish or Christian. I'd like to talk a little bit about the spiritual search. You've got a nice picture here.
Before you go on, may I say something quickly?
Sure, please.
As we talked, my sensitivity to the suffering that Harvey's been through at the hands of Catholics became palpable. And he's not sharing with you all of the suffering. You see, my last name is Hesse. My ancestors are German. And it was my Catholic ancestors that were partially perpetrators of the Holocaust. And I was acutely aware of that. I didn't experience prejudice from the Jewish community against me as a Catholic, but on a couple of occasions I was reminded of that name, and it was very much in my consciousness. But until I talked to Harvey and I saw his suffering at that prejudice when he was growing up, Jesus killer, I didn't appreciate the depth of it. Sure, I had heard that before, but my theological training taught me that the Jews didn't kill Jesus. But that's not what 800 years of history said to the Jewish people. So I was very sensitized to that, and then introduced to the Holocaust Museum by Harvey. He lives right behind it. And I went through that. And then I made my trip to Israel. And I told Harvey I would pray for him at the Western Wall. And I had to come back and tell him that when I got to the Western Wall, I didn't think of Harvey. I had to be honest. I had a couple days to tour, and the final day, I think I had an Arab taxi cab driver. He was taking me into the Palestinian territory, and I was all over the place. And swam in the Dead Sea, and I didn't realize that the Dead Sea didn't have many good changing rooms, so I came out of there with my shirt dirty. I had that off. I had just a t-shirt, dirty shoes, filthy hair, and I was running out of time. And I said, look, I still want to go to the Western Wall. And I get there, and everybody's dressed respectfully, except me. It was almost as if I felt the dirt of my heritage. This is the part of the journey I didn't expect. When I first called Harvey, I had no idea I was going to go to this place. But I can tell you I did contemplative prayer at the wall. And of course, all the Jews around me were doing their own type of prayer. But it was this collective consciousness of the Jewish people that touched me. It wasn't just Harvey. So when I came back, I was renewed in a different way that I didn't expect. And I started to realize that somehow I was put on a journey that leads to more than just my own experiences of prejudice against me by my own fellow Catholics, but that there was a bigger healing process in play here than I had dreamed of. And so I don't know where this is going, but I'm hoping, and I think Harvey is hoping too, that it goes to a continuing process of the two communities to sensitize the Catholic community as to the real suffering that took place. Because I think there's a naivete in the Catholic community about this. Sure, they talk about it theoretically, but not the way Harvey has taught me. So I'm sorry, that's off the script.
Thank you for sharing your deepest feelings with us. We are on a spiritual journey. That's why we're here. And because one way that I find helpful in thinking about the spiritual journey is to think about it as a mountain, like the picture you all have there. Great mountain, massive, tall, and at the top of the mountain there's a impregnable cloud which obscures the summit. And on the summit of the mountain is the goal of this spiritual search, and that goal could be understood as enlightenment. It could be understood as oneness. It could be understood as God. And we climb and we get up there, but we never really reach the summit in the sense that we can ever stand there in the light of day and say, aha, I see, I understand, no more mystery. We don't penetrate the mystery. Some mystery is always going to remain, but the higher we ascend, the more deeply we can experience the mystery. Now, if you stay with the metaphor of the mountain, when we start out on our paths upward, on our spiritual paths, we're starting out from points which are very, very, very far apart. This is a massive base of the mountain. But as we ascend towards the meditative state, the paths are going to converge, and they become closer, and they become closer. Whatever path we're on, I think leads us to a at least similar and perhaps identical meditative experience. Whatever we say about the meditative experience is less than the experience. Experience is always beyond anything that we can say about it. But if one has had an experience and someone else talks about it, one can resonate, one can understand, yeah, that's similar to what I have known, what I've experienced. In my own practice, I've learned is very much akin to something in the Jewish tradition called ayin meditation. Ayin is a Hebrew word which means nothing or no thing. And in ayin meditation, the meditator tries to meditate on nothing so that everything that is kind of dissolves into the source of being. Kind of empty yourself so that you can be filled with a presence. And then I found out that in the Buddhist tradition there's something called sunyata. And I'm told that sunyata is very similar in many ways to what I understand as ayin meditation. And then in my work with Bob, I learned that as one who meditates on nothing, on no thing, I'm a contemplative. But I think the important point is that what we call the experience doesn't really matter. What matters is the experience. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about the meditative journey. Whenever spiritual seekers talk about God or talk about transcendence or oneness, they usually resort to metaphor. Now, we all know what a circle is. You have a picture to remind you. A circle is a two-dimensional structure. It's got a center, and it's got a circumference. And the distance from the center to every point on the circumference is the same. That's what makes it round. That's what makes it a circle. Now, in the 5th century BCE, there was a Greek philosopher whose name was Empedocles, and this is what he said about God. He said, "The nature of God is a circle, of which the center is everywhere, and the circumference is nowhere." The nature of God is a circle of which the center is everywhere, and the circumference is nowhere. And I could repeat it again, and it would still be hard to envision that kind of a circle. But to the extent that it leads us to wrestle with the idea of an infinite presence, I think the metaphor works very well. Now, we can't draw an infinite circle, so I've drawn an ordinary circle. And we're going to let that start as our metaphor for the infinite. And start out by looking at the picture, please, and you'll see there's a dot outside the circle, and then there's a path that leads that dot to the circle, and then the path leads that dot into the circle, and then that dot kind of fades out, kind of disappears. Now, at this point, if you're comfortable doing so, let me ask you to just close your eyes. You know what the picture looks like. Keep it in mind, and just listen to me talking about the picture. Think of the circle as God, or as the source of all being, or as the oneness of everything in creation. Now that dot is you, with your thoughts outside the circle. Think of the circle, think of God as a vast, infinite sea. Think of everything of creation as of the sea, as of God. Think of yourself as of the oneness, as of God. Think of yourself as a bubble in the sea of God. There's just the fragile wall of the bubble between you and the oneness. And now the thin wall dissolves, and there's just the sea. There's nothing but God. Okay, if you will now just gently and slowly open your eyes. That was you inside the circle. When you're in the oneness, your ego, like the wall of the bubble, dissolves. There are no thoughts. And that is the meditative journey. Oneness prayer brings you, the bubble, into the sea. Contemplative prayer dissolves the bubble. Now, that's interesting and raises some important questions that have been debated for millennia in many cultures, which is what's real. I'm talking about two completely different experiences, being inside the circle, being outside the circle. What is reality? So I'd like to draw your attention to the picture at the bottom of that page. If you'd look at that, please. It's labeled, "What do you see?" Okay, everybody have it? Okay. Anybody want to tell me what they see in that picture?
Well, I see two things. One, I see two people looking at each other, and then I also see like a kiddish cup, like a chalice.
Good. Does everybody see two faces? Anybody who can't see two faces in that picture? Okay. Does everybody see that goblet? Everybody can. I want you to notice that it really is a picture of a goblet. And if you look at it a little bit differently, it really is a picture of two faces. But notice that when you're seeing the goblet, when you're really seeing the goblet, you can't see the faces. And when you're really seeing the faces, you can't see the goblet. You can't see both at the same time. And I think that's just the same as not being able to be in your ego and in the oneness at the same time. But when you're seeing the goblet in this picture, you know the faces are really there, even though you can't see them. When you're seeing the faces, you know the goblet is there, even though you can't see it. The reason you know that is because you have seen them both. So you know that they're there. So we spend, 99-point-something% of our lives outside the circle, living in our egos, with our egos, and what we know and feel and understand through our ego, we call the real world, and it's real. It's real. But when, perhaps at a meditative experience, we leave our ego behind, when we're inside the circle, then the oneness we experience is real. It's real. But it's like the picture. We can't see both at the same time. But we know, wherever we are, that each is real. And we know it because we have experienced both. So even though we don't live our lives in the oneness, we have experienced it. And while we live in what we call the real world with our ego, which is where we want to be, we know that the oneness is also real. But we can go back and forth from the world of our ego to the world of the oneness. And when we're in the world of our ego, we're informed by what we've experienced in the world of the oneness. So the spiritual search provides us with sufficient challenges. We have a real challenge that Father Keating calls us to face when he says, surrender to the unknown. I think what he's saying to us is there is impenetrable mystery. And our challenge is not to explain the mystery. Our challenge is to experience it, to experience the mystery. And Rabbi Shakta Shalomi Reb Zalman challenges us. He says, don't let the words get in the way. And I think what he's telling us is you need to trust the truth of an experience. Whatever you say about the experience is less than the reality. Words can't fully capture an experience. Hearing about the music is not a substitute for hearing the music. And we will talk about contemplative prayer, and then we will leave the words behind. You want to talk about contemplative history?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that it's good to have a grounding in the history of contemplative prayer in both traditions. The term contemplative prayer is really a term that's used interfaith. So the term is used by the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and the Islamic tradition. Every religion has its contemplative tradition. And Harvey and I went through the history of the different Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition in historical sense. And it's amazing century by century how it was playing out. The prophet Ezekiel was in a way a mystic and had mystical experiences, and we share that between our faiths.
In the sense that Ezekiel's search was to know God directly. To know God directly, and that's how I understand our search as well. Yeah.
Then in the 0 to 200 Common Era, of course, there was Jesus, and I'll give you some quotations later by the various people in these different historical periods. But the classic that he really had when he was asked, how do you pray, is Matthew 6:6, and that is, you go to your inner room, you close the door, inner room, close the door, and pray to your Heavenly Father in secret. And your Heavenly Father answers you in secret. You do not use many words like the pagans. They already have their reward. And only when he was pressed did he say, okay, if you're going to use words, now that's my interpretation. Then he said the Our Father. But clearly that was the kind of the lynch point for the Christian tradition. But the common shared traditions prior to that were already alluding to this. And in the 600s, the 300 to 600 range, which is for the Christian tradition, I'm quoting the 4th century, were the Abbas and Ammas, Hebrew words that describe the mothers and fathers of the Christian tradition that went into the desert in Egypt and tried to understand exactly what Jesus was saying. And fortunately, their discussions on how to do this were documented by Cassian in the Conferences. It's the longest work in Christian antiquity. It's one of the books over here. And in Conferences 9 and 10, he describes using one word. He uses the descriptions of how to help you enter this contemplative state that's common between us. Do you want to talk about those centuries here?
Yeah, when one goes back and utilizes the lenses of understanding what a contemplative experience is, that one can reread things and recognize in the words that this is an effort to describe something that we share. Akiba Shimon Bar Yochai, back in the 3rd century CE, an anonymous text called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, which is a very mystical, magical text as well. The first person to be considered a Kabbalist, perhaps, is someone whose name was Isaac the Blind. That's 12th century CE. And of course, the Zohar appeared in the 13th and 14th century with Moses de Leon, the author. The Zohar was and remains the definitive expression of Kabbalah, of Jewish spiritual seeking, mystical seeking.
Yeah. Every century has had its contemplatives, and the word contemplative and mystic are interchangeable. The reason a lot of people will avoid the word mystic is because it sounds kind of like magic. But it came about by the fact that in the Catholic tradition, The church didn't understand what these monks and nuns were doing, and they said, this is kind of mysterious to us, so you keep it in the monasteries and the convents, and we'll call you mystics because it's mysterious, but we don't know what's going on. It's really an equivalent meaning to the word contemplative. And in the 14th century, The Cloud of Unknowing was written by an anonymous monk in England, and a beautiful description of exactly the kind of prayer practice that we both practice. And probably the giants in the 1500s were John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. And the amazing thing is that when you read John of the Cross's works, he's trying to describe this experience. And because there are no words to describe it, you got to live it. You can't, like Harvey said, you can talk about classical music all you want, but you got to live it. It doesn't mean anything otherwise. So a lot of writers will revert to poetry with symbolism. And if you read John of the Cross and his poetry, and then you look at the Zohar, it's unbelievable. The very same type of thing that's taking place. I don't know that there was cross-fertilization historically. I'm not aware of any, but every century's kind of had that, including 1600s, 1700s, Francis de Sales, and you want to?
One thinks of Isaac Luria, a mystic in Palestine in the 16th century who created a mystical cosmology which has persisted among spiritual seekers to this day. One has to think of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov brings us up to about the 18th century, and he's the founder of modern Hasidism. I've read some of his things with new eyes, and I'm going to share something with you a little bit later. But I sense that his experience is very much like the experience that we're seeking. And then when we get closer to our time, there's Martin Buber, who's well known for the I-thou relationship, the ultimate I-thou relationship being a relationship with the divine. Abraham Joshua Heschel. And when we get up to today, I was certainly influenced by Thomas Keating's book, Open Mind, Open Heart, which once I got past the very real barrier of language, I got past the barrier of language and I got to the essence of what he was talking about, and it moved me along on my own spiritual search and deepened my meditative experience as well.
And I had the same reaction to Rabbi Zalman. He's got this spiritual character to him that you know without words where he's been, and it's just pure love. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I've never met him in person, but I've talked to him on the phone a few times, and he and Keating both wrote an open letter endorsing this effort that we're doing, and you'll get a copy of that later. And I'm embarrassed to say that, just to give you an example of how he's so mystical, is I put the letter together first, and Harvey and I went over it, and then we sent it to Keating, and we sent it to Rabbi Zalman. And Keating finds a couple grammatical errors. Zalman signs it, and his name is misspelled. And he didn't say anything, he just signed it. And then Harvey graciously points it out, and I thought, oh, my God, I misspelled the guy's name, but he signed it anyway. And that was just so Zalman. I mean, don't let the words get in the way. Don't let the spelling get in the way. This is the message. I mean, the guy just exudes that. So, the person who kind of was a prelude to Keating was Merton, and in the introduction you heard that I happened to be at the monastery where he was at. And even though I never met him because he was a hermit, later in life I read his works, and one of them is a 7-story mountain. So this imagery of mountain that Harvey talked about is also replete through the Christian tradition. And it helps to give some biblical quotations, and these are quotations that we share between the Jewish and Christian communities. And I'll read them. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord. Isaiah. Now, As I read these, it may not resonate how this all hangs together, but after we do the prayer practice, I can tell you that I'll share with you my experience. I read a lot of these things before I started praying contemplatively. And it sounded nice, but it didn't really resonate. After I practiced, then I went back and read those quotations, and then it came alive. I knew exactly what it was saying. Before, I didn't. So we may have people here that have practiced oneness prayer that we're going to be teaching or whatever. But if you haven't, I would encourage you, after you get this handout at the end, and you've practiced this, go back and reread these. I have stilled my soul, Psalm 131. Be still and know that I am God, Psalm 46. And we're going to use that later. I will lead her into the desert and speak to her heart, Hosea. It is good to hope in silence for the saving help of the Lord, Lamentations. O God, for you my body yearns, for you my soul thirsts, Psalm 63. Our soul waits for the Lord, Psalm 33. Better a handful of quietness, Ecclesiastes. And this is one now that the DVD that Rabbi Zalman and Keating did together, this was kind of one of the central themes of it from Song of Songs. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. I think that's a powerful one. Now those are biblical quotations, but there have been contemplatives throughout history. And I already gave you the one from Jesus, go to your inner room when he was asked how to pray. Close the door. Pray to your Father in secret.
The Zohar says, go to yourself, search deep within, and thereby discover the divine.
Yeah. Another quote from the Zohar, a spark of impenetrable darkness. It's amazing. When I read these, it just resonates. It doesn't matter what the theology is.
John of the Cross said, as often as distinct ideas occur, without resting in them, return to God. And that's something we're going to be practicing.
Yeah.
In Thomas Keating said, the sacred word is a way of letting go of all thoughts. We're going to talk about a sacred word and how we can use it to let go of all thoughts.
And this quote from Rabbi Zalman, and this is so Zalman, it's just wonderful. He's got this humor with him with the reality mixed together. We have dialed that hotline to the center of the universe and said, God, oh God. Amazing. A lot of what we've talked about so far is, describing this, and you might say, well, this is all esoteric. I mean, what? This is nice to hear, but I'm going to go home and, I'll go to my services on Sabbath, and so what, So there is a need to make this into a practical method to be able to help ourselves enter this state. And it starts with the definition of prayer, and that is prayer is a relationship with God. You'll notice it's not defined as talking to God, which is kind of what most people would say, because there also is receiving too. So if you look at that definition and you start to wonder, well, how do I relate to God in prayer? One way to look at it is analogous to a human relationship. And by drawing in the analogy of a relationship between two humans and then applying it to our relationship with God, I think it helps give some insight as to what this relationship is and how it can build. And so I will kind of talk about 4 stages of relationship. And these stages, Harvey and I went through. I think we all go through them. I must admit, though, we rushed through the first three because we were kind of at the fourth pretty quickly. But so the starting of a relationship is usually an acquaintanceship. I mean, you say, Harvey, my name is Bob Hesse, and
Harvey Gordon.
And you're Gordon. Nice to meet you. I understand you're interested in Jewish contemplative prayer. Yeah, that's fantastic. We'll have to get together sometime.
Okay.
It's an acquaintanceship. It's very formal, very informational. On the divine level, it would be like reading the scriptures in the Bible, like the quotations we went through. You're being introduced to this God. Then we go to a higher level, and that's a friendliness level. And at that level, Harvey, I really enjoyed praying together with you. That I resonated.
Too, yeah, it was good.
Resonated with that. Now we know each other well enough that we're doing something together that we enjoy. And this is more of the thinking level. Before it was the reading of the scripture. Now it's the thinking about the scripture. In a sense, the guided meditation that Harvey gave earlier is that level where you're using your thought process. You're not rejecting your thoughts. You're using your thought process to think about the scripture and how this person God is, and how we relate. Then the next level is a true friendship level. And this, Harvey, I experienced that pain.
Thank you.
And you know that I would do anything I could for you.
I know.
Okay. This is the level that most of us reach and plateau out at. I know I did for a long, long time. And it's the speaking level. It's saying to God, I need your help. The shortest prayer being help. Shortest prayer. Thanking God for the help that He's given. Adoring God. Respecting God. Things that we kind of express there. In one tradition, it's commonly referred to as adoration, contrition, sorry for things you've done, thanksgiving for things that God's done for you, and then asking for help. So, in the human realm, though, there is a deeper level, but we often forget about that deeper level, you know? I know Harvey. Harvey knows me. If we were to say anything, it would be disruptive. I know his hurts. He shared those with me. He doesn't have to repeat them. He knows how I feel about him and how I feel about those hurts, and I don't have to repeat that. We have all had this experience with a human being, whether it's a parent or a child or a friend or whatever. It's equivalent to the divine hug. That's what contemplative prayer is. It's the divine hug without words. I've mentioned reading scripture, thinking about it, speaking to God, and now we're contemplating. Okay? And he and I have both practiced this. We talked about now obliquely about two different types of prayer. And
I'd like to share that prayer is one of those loaded words that had me hung up for a very long time. Prayer, as generally understood, perhaps requires that there be somebody to whom one is speaking and from whom one is receiving a message. But prayer, I think, can be understood as communing with the transcendent, and the transcendent could be anything that's not ordinary. So I could have a prayer experience in the mountains. I could have a prayer experience in a concert hall. Doesn't preclude the other forms of prayer, but for me, that would embrace all the forms of prayer in which I engage. The prayers that we're going to talk about now are the oneness prayer and the contemplative prayer. Really different. The oneness prayer is a prayer to be open to the oneness, to receive, to be able to receive the oneness. And the contemplative prayer is to be in the oneness. That's the difference.
When I went through those various levels of relationship, I didn't want to imply in any way that you discard any of them. You're essentially at all levels. It doesn't mean I don't read Scripture or I don't read the Bible, or it doesn't mean that I don't still holler help to God or get upset with him. But I think like any human relationship, you've got to be a mix of all levels. And there are really two aspects of the prayer practice of this oneness prayer, which is, Harvey just described, oneness is different than contemplative. Oneness is something that we do. Contemplative prayer is something God does. So the oneness prayer has two aspects to it. One is it's an openness to the union with the oneness. In other words, we're opening ourselves up to God. Whatever God wants to do with us in the contemplative prayer is up to God. It's also discipline. This oneness prayer is like playing a piano. You don't just learn it and then not do it for a week or two and do it again. I mean, it takes practice. It takes discipline and openness to God. Very simple, just two things. There are two fundamental aspects to the oneness prayer. And this is a key. First, before I get into those aspects, the key is that you can't enter this oneness prayer with the intent of getting anything out of it. And I can relate to that because my German heritage is rather controlling. So that's what my wife tells me. Other people have told me that too. Harvey, blessed Harvey's never said that to me. But you have to give up control. And if you are seeking to get something out of this, then you're essentially putting yourself back in control. All you're doing is really two things. You have the intention to be in the oneness presence, and you are consenting. You have to be openness to the presence and the action within. So there's intention and consent. Those are the two things that you do. Your intention is to be with God, and you have the consent to accept God if and when God comes. You're not seeking anything. You're not seeking lower blood pressure, peace, tranquility, or a contemplative experience that we've talked about a little bit. You're not seeking that either. What happens after this prayer, and sometimes during, but usually after, is mystery. Harvey and I have talked at length about this, and the best word to describe it is mystery. I mean, we've talked about gifts, we've talked about consequences and whatever. We're going to get into that later. But ultimately, it's a mystery. And you just don't, like he said earlier, Harvey said earlier, you don't try to understand the mystery, you just live it.
Experience it.
There are 4 guidelines for the prayer. And the handout at the very end will list these. One is you have to pick a sacred symbol. Now, that symbol is merely a symbol of your desire to be with God. It doesn't have to have meaning to anyone else. Generally, the symbol is either a word or an image. As beginners, you usually use a word. In both traditions, this dates back ancient. As I said, even in the conferences in the 4th century talked about, one of the abbas said, "Give me a word." Well, here, We're going to allow you to pick your own. You sit in a comfortable position. Now, for those in Eastern meditation, can use sometimes sit on the floor in a yoga position. You're welcome to do that if you want. But for me, I need some back support, so those benches are even hard for me to do. But you got to sit erect so that you're not fighting the imbalance. So it's got to be comfortable. And the third thing is that thoughts will come. Now, they come because we're human. The thoughts are not our enemies. We're human. And this is key to this prayer, whenever we become aware of our thoughts, or we become engaged with our thoughts, two different ways of looking at it, as soon as that awareness arrives, we ever so gently return to our sacred word, or our image. What we're saying to God is, I would rather be with you than with my own thoughts. This is the ultimate letting go and letting God. The ultimate. Then at the end of about 20 minutes, which is what is recommended normally, you come out of this very gently with a gong or whatever, and there's a gentle readjustment. So there's basically picking a sacred symbol, comfortable position. Thoughts will come and you return to the sacred word. And the fourth is a gentle readjustment.
Let me confess right now. Let me share. I just find myself falling into a trap again and again and again. And I just found myself falling into that trap again. And it has to do with words, not surprisingly. And in this case, it has to do with the word God. And the trap I fall into is that when I hear Bob use the word God, then what I imagine is what I think that he thinks he means by God. And that becomes what I'm hearing. And that's really so constricting. I think a good way that won't get a whole lot of argument to think of God is the wow of the cosmos. God is the oh my God of the cosmos. That is how I understand God. And understanding God that way, I can relate to everything that Bob says. But we have a tendency to think that we know what's in the other person's mind when they use the term. And that's the trap that I fall into all the time, and I wanted to confess it.
Yeah. It gets back to what Rabbi Zalman said, don't let the words get in the way.
Don't let the words get in the way.
And when we went through this was a real, I wouldn't say struggle, but it was a wonderful journey, because we were kicking around different ways of saying it, because ultimately there are no words. I think that's where we ended up. It was,
These sacred symbols could be words, or they could be images. And the point is not for it to mean anything. The point is to pick something which is short, simple, not very complex, not something that's going to lead you into a thought, and to use that word or that symbol just to signify, to remind yourself that you are open to the oneness. So when your thoughts come, you can go to that sacred word, just go to it, let the thoughts slip away, let them go, let them gently go away. And you do that by using that sacred word or sacred symbol. And then you let that sacred word or sacred symbol gently go away, and you're without thought. There's really no limit and no restrictions on what words or images you could use, so I'll just give you half a dozen or so, just in case any of these speak to you, but please use your own. Oneness. Abba. Hineni, a Hebrew word meaning here I am. One. Shalom. Ayin. nothing. Images like light, breath, just being aware of your own breath works for some. Or the four letters of the ineffable name of God in the Jewish tradition, which in English would be a YHWH. In Hebrew, Yud, He, Vav, He, a word that's not pronounced but which can be envisioned. Those are a few examples. But whatever works for you. It's a good idea to stay with your sacred word and not change it once you're in the prayer, because that leads you to thought. And our goal is we don't want to be troubled by thinking. Okay, when should you do this? Well, we're going to do it today, but generally do it when you're relaxed, when you're alert. Morning is a good time. It's important, I think, to do it before meals, and that's got a physiologic explanation. When you meditate, your circulation tends to go out to your extremities, to your skin, and you find that if you're a little chilled and you sit down and meditate, in 2 or 3 minutes you're not chilled anymore. But that's going away from your intestinal tract. And when you're digesting, that's where the circulation is. So they kind of pull and tug at each other, so it's not a good combination. How long? We like to shoot for 20 minutes. I think that if you're having that kind of a day and you get in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, it's not nearly as good as 20 minutes. But boy, it's sure a whole lot better than no minutes. So I would say that that's something to aspire towards. This practice is recommended to be done twice a day, to be done in the morning and then again in the afternoon. Again, the realities of one's life will impact on this. This is an ideal. Okay. Where do you do it? Someplace that's quiet, where the lighting is dim, where it's unlikely that you're going to be interrupted for 20 minutes. And you can do it alone, or you can do it in a group, and there are benefits to each, and it's good to practice both. It's good to be in a sturdy chair. A chair like this would be fine. A chair like that isn't so terrific, but that's all we got for you. I personally meditate on a zafu, in a half lotus position, because I feel more grounded when I'm in that position. But most people would like to be in a chair. It's good until you have a real sense of how long you've been meditating, to have a gentle alarm that won't jar you, but which will tell you 20 minutes have gone by. You should be wearing loose clothing. Loosen anything that's constricting, certainly not a necktie, your belt, buttons, whatever. I think it's really important to remove your shoes if you're going to meditate. You know, I think of when Moses saw the burning bush and he realized he was in a holy place. This was a different experience. What God told him was, take off your shoes, you're in a sacred place. So I always take my shoes off. I don't get a meditating. It signals to my body what my intention is. I sometimes will start just by sitting down quietly and note my breathing, but other times I'll start with a verse, reading a verse, or chanting. I like to do that. And as far as the use of religious paraphernalia, I often meditate using a skull cap, a kippah, and a prayer shawl, a talit. And what I'll do is I'll sit and I'll completely envelop myself in the shawl. I'm in a very different place. Always have your back straight. If you bent over, it's inimical to the meditative experience. These details do pay off. Your head should be free, not leaning back on a pillow. Feet planted firmly on the ground. Again, I suggest taking off your shoes. And with your eyes closed.
We've gone pretty long now, and we thought that it would be a good idea. If you want to have any questions, we ask them now, and then we'll take a brief break, say let's say 10 minutes, 10-minute break, and then when you come back, if there are any questions, we can talk again, and then we'll go into the prayer. Okay, so there are any questions? Okay, 10-minute break. Be back at, say, 25 after. Well, welcome back. We'll kind of gather here. They brought cushions for those who want to use cushions.
Any further questions came up while you all were on your break? We can answer. Okay, we're going to shortly go into the meditative experience, the contemplative prayer. And the way we are going to go into it is not to jump into an icy lake, but to slip into a warm pool. About, I don't know, a year ago, I happened to attend a talk about a Tibetan Buddhist practice called sound healing. And I don't think I learned a whole lot about it, but I do remember that it involved 5 syllables. And the first syllable is something like ah, and the second syllable is something like om. And it's chanted. It goes something like ah, ah, ah. Good. The second syllable is more like Aum. 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 Keep chanting. Aum. Aum. As you chant, be aware of how it makes you feel. Aum. Ah. Ah. Om. Some people feel like it makes them open up, makes you feel more open. You can feel it resonating in your own body. It's good to be aware of how it makes you feel. Most of us know the Hebrew word shalom. It means peace. The word shalom is the root of Jerusalem, or in Hebrew, Yerushalayim, which is translated usually as the city of peace. The word shalom is derived from a Hebrew word shalem. And the word shalem means wholeness, completeness, oneness. So when you think of shalom, it's that kind of peace. Now, the healing syllables that we just chanted are a lot like the vowels in shalom. So let's try to chant shalom. And what we'll do is we'll chant it several times. Go with it. Be aware of how it makes you feel. If it makes you feel open, let yourself open up. And then when we're done chanting shalom, I want us to listen to the silence that we have created with our chanting. And then I want us to just sit for a few moments and experience the silence. Shalom. 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 One more. Shalom.
going to now do a prayer of 20 minutes. And I just want to remind you about some of the things that you need to think about before we start, just a reminder. We're going to start with 2 gongs, and then Harvey is going to lead us in the shalom. We'll sing that together, chant it together. And then we'll hit the gong one more time, and then we'll sit in silence for 20 minutes. Be sure you have your sacred image or word. If you're new at this, pick a word, 1 or 2 syllables, non-emotional. Don't make any judgments about the thoughts. You treat them all exactly the same. Even if you have a thought about changing your word, you always let them go and return to your sacred word or symbol. You only call upon your symbol when you become aware of your thoughts. Again, what we're saying is we want to be with you, God. It's interesting why the shalom resonates. The human mind, this sound is a wave, and the human mind intentionally, or I should say subconsciously, wants to be in harmony with other people. So we tend to resonate that same wavelength back. That's why when 2 of us are chanting, it sounds like 3, because it's a standing wave. If you put in the opposite wavelength, peak to valley, you have sound cancellation systems that Bose makes. So the physics of it lends itself to resonating between people. And once we hit the gong, that after I hit the gong the first 2 times, we'll turn the sound system off. Is that what you want to do? So we don't have a upset.
It's already stopped. I don't know what happened.
Okay, I turn it off here?
Yeah, no, you don't do it. Ryan will.
Okay. We had a non-contemplative moment earlier. So you have your symbol, I trust. Take a few minutes here to know what it is. Remember, the thoughts are not your enemy. They're your friends. You're just choosing not to engage them. Do not fight your thoughts. Be gentle. If you try too hard, that's just not the right way to do it. It's a subtlety to this that's important. It can't be violent. It's got to be very subtle and relaxed. Some people enter this restful state quicker than others. If you're a beginner, it may take 5 minutes. It may take 10. If you have 1,000 thoughts, or if you have 1 thought, it doesn't matter. The number of thoughts is not the issue. The issue is how you process them. And in fact, the thoughts themselves ultimately will be healing, and we'll talk about that later. Are we ready? That's the sound of the gong. I'll hit that twice. And keep in mind, when you do the shalom, it'll be a volume control. You're going to be at a higher volume at first, and then the second time a little quieter, and a third time even quieter, because we're entering into that sacred space. And when we come out, it'll be the other way around. It'll be soft, medium, louder. After a prayer practice, sit. We normally don't want to talk. But what is helpful quite often is to ask people how their experience was, if they struggled or whether it was easy or anything that they might want to share. So I would open it up to anybody that would like to speak.
Some of you who are not trained meditators, customary meditators, sitting for 20 minutes is very long. Some of you may have experienced that, and for others who are accustomed to meditation, sometimes it passes remarkably quickly. It's a very subjective experience.
One of the things that people talk about the most is their struggle with thoughts. And so we don't go into that too much before the practice. It's better to experience it before we talk about thoughts. There are several types of thoughts that can come along. One are ordinary thoughts, like I forgot to turn the lights on in the car. There are others that are attractions and aversions, like I don't like that guy Bill that I work with. Some are insights or enlightenments. Suddenly I understand better who God is, what God is, what the oneness is. They may be introspective reflections. I'm not doing this prayer very well. And then finally, one of the types of thoughts can be unloading of the subconscious. I remember that hurt when I was little, that my parent did to me or whatever. All of these thoughts are treated the same, and you very gently return to your sacred symbol. How successful the prayer is measured not by how many thoughts or how few thoughts you have, but if the time goes by quickly and you think you've been praying for 5 minutes and it's been 20 minutes, that usually means that you were pretty deep. The unloading of the unconscious can be a healing thing. It's the divine healer working with us. It may be something we did wrong or something that somebody else did wrong to us. And what we're saying, and what God is doing, is allowing that thought to come forth and allowing us to forgive other and self by gently letting go of that unloading of the unconscious. It's the divine healer working within us. These thoughts come, and they're one way of looking at them is what we call the 4 R's principle, which means you resist no thoughts, you retain no thoughts, you react to no thoughts, and you return ever so gently, like a feather on a pillow, to your sacred symbol.
Question sometimes comes up, why meditate? What are your goals when you meditate? Personally, I don't meditate with a goal just to know the oneness, which is not to say that there aren't consequences. One of my meditation teachers was a rabbi, and she shared with us that about 6 months earlier, she had started at a gym, and she was working out regularly 3 or 4 times a week. And she did that because she thought that would be a good thing to do. She might feel better, her health might be served by it. In just some general way, she thought this was a part of her life that needed to be addressed. So she did it. Now, in a synagogue service, 3 times a week, the Torah is taken out and it's read. The Torah scroll is a large scroll. It's open, it's read. And then after that, reading is over. Traditionally, the reader will take a hold of the scroll and lift it up and show it to the congregation. And she shared with us that had always been a problem. That could weigh 20, 25 pounds, And she would get a hold of it, that kind of thing. And now 6 months later, she finishes reading the Torah. Nobody can see. And she said, I didn't go to the gym so that I'd be able to lift a Torah scroll. She said, I went to the gym, and as a consequence of this physical activity that I was engaged in, it turns out I was able to lift the Torah scroll. Had she not been able to lift the Torah scroll, it would not have vitiated the experience of going to the gym. It was still a worthwhile thing to do. And she certainly didn't set out with that as a goal in mind. So I like to think of things that we don't predict, but which a lot of people do experience. And I think of them as consequences rather than as goals, or rather than as fruits that one has earned. It's just something that often happens in the trail of a meditative experience.
Harvey and I talked about how to present this quite a bit because we wanted to be sure that it was clear that we don't do it to gain anything and put us back in control. But by the same token, people will tell us, and it's well known what experiences they experience in terms of consequences. And potential consequences are mostly pleasurable, but not all. Some pleasurable consequences are wisdom, patience, peace. Peace is a big one, quite often. Kindness, gentleness, generosity, charity, love, joy. One of the potential consequences is not pleasurable, but they all are good for us. And the potential one that's not pleasurable is the unloading of the subconscious. So we're being given a chance to heal, even though it may be a painful healing. Ultimately, God knows that it's best for us. So they're all good for us, and most are pleasurable, but not all. I can tell you that when I experienced an unloading in the middle of my prayer, I wept. But since I was practiced, within a second or two, I was able to let go of the weeping. So it's that some people will talk about that. But again, you don't do this to gain anything. God seems to know what he's doing. We don't have to guide him, tell him what to do or how to do it. We just let the consequences be what they are. One way to talk about these consequences is what they are and what they aren't. The consequences don't normally come during the prayer. They aren't present instantly. They aren't cause and effect. In other words, I do this, I get that. They're not the prayer's purpose. They're not divinely guaranteed. They're not totally predictable. That's the wonderful part. They're wonderful that way. They're not prayer replacements of other types of prayer. You should continue to do discursive prayer, means using words, obviously, reading scripture and the Torah. And they're not just pleasurable, which I already mentioned. Consequences are usually related to personal growth. They are, a listening ability seems to get better. We seem to be less judgmental of others. And interpersonal relationships seem to improve. We tend to act in a loving way rather than react. In other words, we don't say, well, that person's hurting, we need to love them, or that person did something and I'm angry at them. We tend to act proactively rather than reactively. And because of this subtlety in our lives, that this prayer can have a consequence in, quite often someone close to us recognizes the improvement sooner than we do. I've heard many times spouses say, I don't know what's going on, but you're not as angry as you used to be. And then there's a third area besides personal growth and interpersonal relationships, and that is service to others. The organization that I work with is called Contemplative Outreach, and the reason is that you first are a contemplative, which lessens yourself, and then you become outreach to others because you're more other-oriented. That's kind of what some of the holy people have talked about. Mother Teresa was a classic, in my view. She was a contemplative, and once you're there, and you know God exists within you, you know God exists in the oneness of all of us. And there are ways of extending these consequences throughout the day, in addition to just doing the prayer twice a day. Certainly praying twice a day is a good way to do it. You're not obligated to do that. It's just, but people by their experience know that that's a good thing to do. If you miss one of the times, don't feel bad. If you fall asleep and you wake up, don't beat yourself up. Yeah.
Why do you call it prayer? If it's meditation practice, it's a contemplation practice of stilling the mind and the body, following the breath or
Well, I'll answer it from the Christian perspective, and then I'll let Harvey answer it from the Jewish perspective.
I'll answer it from a Harvey perspective.
Or Harvey perspective. He always does it. It's really related to your worldview. In other words, I believe that we all experience God. It's just that we may not all call it that. And I believe that we all are in that prayerful state, even though others may not call it that. I don't disparage another type of meditative practice that may not call it prayer, even though I believe they're experiencing that oneness of the divine. But I don't make any judgments about them. It's just for the Christian tradition and my tradition and what I practice. It is prayer. If you personally feel that it's not, but it's a place that draws you, that's okay. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's the definition of prayer.
That's the issue, and that's one of the challenges that Reb Zalman laid out for us is don't let the words get in the way. I never, during the years I've been a meditator, had not thought of what I was doing as prayer. But when I talked about, we have to use words, we have to use language. I can embrace this being called meditative prayer because I can understand prayer as an openness to communing with the transcendent. And I don't limit my understanding of prayer to petition, to praise, to thanks. So understanding prayer that way, I'm comfortable calling this practice prayer, although what I experience is not different from what I was experiencing when I was in a deep meditative state. But I'm not worried about it. It's interesting that there's a book here that's also on the table. It's called Your Word is Fire, The Hasidic Masters on Contemplative Prayer. It's by Arthur Green and Barry Holtz. And a lot of this is what the Baal Shem Tov taught and what he wrote. And what he experiences as prayer, which I'm going to share with the group shortly, is very much like what I experience and what many of us experience as a meditative state. That's not the Jewish answer, that's the Harvey answer.
Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah. Prayer is just a word that I was raised to think I was petitioning.
Yeah.
Or thinking the idea that it was an active.
Yeah.
And when I started learning Buddhist and Hinduism, that this other meditation that I do, it's never been said, call it prayer. Yes, you do, and you say, what do I need to know? I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can do when you're meditating. And when Keating came out, well, he didn't come out, but the book about contemplative prayer, I was stymied, I think, a little bit by if there was something I was supposed to, in my upbringing, that I was supposed to be able to achieve by calling it prayer.
Yeah.
And your part of your explanation helps it. It would be interesting to research the word prayer. What really is that, a conversation?
I've looked at the definition of prayer by different holy people, and the definitions vary all over the map. I think that when I was going through that relationship level, and I got to that friendship level, that's the level that most of us traditionally think of as prayer. It's discursive. It's talking to God. The deeper union form has been around for centuries, but it's been hidden away because us lay people weren't trusted with it. But it's been there all along in both traditions. And I think it's because when we grow up, we tend to take the training that we have as children as talking to God, and which is okay. It's fine. I think it's wonderful, and I still do that. But it goes so much deeper than that, because ultimately it's not taught. If I ask a group of people, I've done this many times, what do you define prayer as? 90% of them will say speaking to God.
Instead of listening.
Yeah. And so this is really adding that component of interactive computer kind of language. It's the interaction. It's the relationship. That's why I resonate with Keating's definition. Merton called prayer, I think it was something like the Song of the Heart or something like that. But Keating tends to be a bit more concrete. But all of the great religious leaders have defined prayer differently. And I think one of the things that I found in the spiritual journeys of all these holy people is that inevitably, there are like 4 steps that are common to all of them. And one of them is that we have to give up our image of God. To grow spiritually, we have to change our image of God. And I think that's the biggest challenge for most of us. It was for me.
Oh yeah, the notion that any image of God is an idol is resonates to me, and this is not a new idea. Going back in the Jewish tradition to Maimonides, Maimonides taught that one cannot make any affirmative claims about God because God is more than that. Otherwise, it's not God. So one can only use negative terms. In your tradition, there's the via negativa. Aquinas, was it?
Yeah.
And in the Hindu tradition, there's a neti neti. Neither God is neither this nor that. But once you start to say God is thus and such, it's arguable that it's an idol because it's something that you've created. Tricky.
And that's why science has looked into studies of the brain and also studies of atheism. And it turns out the conclusion is that there aren't as many atheists as we think there are, or so-called claim to be, because what they're saying is that they don't believe in your God.
I don't believe in the God that
you believe in.
That you're telling me is God.
Yeah.
Zalman said that, explained that to a Buddhist when the Buddhist was telling him why he didn't believe in God. Zalman said, I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. so that, and Karen Armstrong, in her recent book, The Case for God, talks about atheism as well and says that atheism really is a rejection of somebody else's definition of God. And the atheists who are out in the front lines right now writing best-selling books are rejecting a fundamentalist definition of God. But atheists don't, as a group, necessarily reject spiritual, reject transcendent, reject divine. They reject a particular idol, which is somebody's creation of what God is.
Yeah. This may be an interesting point to bring up Sam Harris.
Yeah.
You've read about Sam Harris and his writings, okay? I don't know if you have. He's a classic, or so-called atheist. Well, I was at a conference, and it was a Buddhist conference primarily, but it was on research on the brain, and he was one of the speakers. And they were all loving, except his talk was very disparaging towards religion. And the Buddhist friends were very sensitive to this, and they came rushing up to me, and they said, "We are so sorry that he said things that were so rude, and we've asked him to please talk to you privately." And I said, "Well, I wasn't offended. I'm a big boy. I can, it's not an issue. But, okay, I'll meet with him." Well, I met with Sam Harris privately, and I knew from what he was saying that he didn't understand at least the Catholic belief system. One was, you got to follow everything the Pope says, and that's not true. You got to have your conscience as the primary driver. So if the Pope says something wrong, we don't have to follow it. You don't have to convert people. He had all of these biases built in. And so I sat down with him, and I didn't know what to expect. I thought, why would they call a meeting and have him meet with me if they thought he had insulted me? So I just thought, well, maybe he's going to apologize or something. I don't know. So I just listened. And it wasn't that. He came on real strong. And he was basically rejecting my God, what he thought was my God. But he didn't know who my God was. Not that I know. But I know that God isn't what I think he is either, you know. And I insisted that he listen to the 4 points that I have to make so that he understands where I'm coming from before we continue the conversation. And even though he agreed, he kept reverting back. He was almost like a child response. And I kept holding him to it. Finally, we got through the conversation, and he was vehemently anti all religions because in his mind they were all fundamentalists, which is part of what I've run into in terms of prejudice as a Catholic, fundamentalists, you know. But every religion has its fundamentalist wing. But his solution to that was to reject all religion. And so I said, you know, we have a common goal here, and that is to love one another and not to be judging other people. And I embraced him. And he didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do. He just looked at me and got quiet. The silence. The silence of the hug. And then he came back off his combative relationship, and as we walked away, he wasn't combative, not necessarily listening or agreeing. He disagreed with my own interpretation of what my own religion teaches. He seemed to know better. But finally, I ended it with another hug. And here, he's written a lot of anti-religious stuff. So every human being's got that spark. It's a matter of touching them. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry I went on a path that way, but
That was a good story, a fruitful digression.
Pardon me?
It was a fruitful digression.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just a comment, going back to Mother Teresa and this has to do with the definition of prayer and meditation. Someone asked her, what do you do when you pray? And she says, I listen to God. And the person asked her, but then what does God do? She said, he listens to me. So, and that was her definition of prayer.
Well, I talked to a lady who worked with Mother Teresa, and she expanded on that story because she was there. And she said it was a reporter, a male reporter. And I said, well, what was Mother Teresa like? And she said, well, there were certain things she didn't like. And by the story, I got the impression it was mainly male Western reporters. And so he asked her, do you pray? She said, yes. What do you say to God? Nothing. What does he say to you? Nothing. Well, what are you doing? I'm listening. What's he doing? He's listening. That was the end of the conversation. Just what you said, only much more dramatic the way it unfolded, I'm telling you. And that's what enabled her to see the God in others. You know? If you can't communicate with a God within, how do you ultimately communicate with a God in others? You know? To me, it's got to start here. I used to go around the world. I've been to 60 different countries. Not that I was looking for God in every place, but I did resonate with the local traditions and kind of sensing where are they at spiritually. And the journey ended here.
This would be perhaps a good time to share what the Baal Shem Tov had to say about prayer. There are two rungs of service that a person can come to know. The first is called katnut, the lesser service. In this state, you may know that there are many heavens encircling you, that the earth on which you stand is but a tiny point, and that all the world is nothing before the endless God. But even knowing all these things, you yourself cannot ascend. This is still the lesser service. It is of this state, the prophet says, from afar God appears to me. But when you serve in Gadlut, the greater service, you take hold of yourself with all your strength, and your mind soars upward, breaking through the heavens all at once, rising higher, higher than the angels. I can resonate to that description if I don't let the words get in the way, that I'm hearing from a contemplative. I think that's very much what he calls the lesser service is very much like the oneness prayer, and what he calls the greater service is very much like the contemplative prayer. It's being in the oneness.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? What we thought we would do is we'll have one more sit and then let you leave in silence so you can carry that with you. If there are any questions afterwards, if you would allow the people to leave quietly, and then you can stay and we'll talk. But it's very powerful to end this silently and walk out silently. You can start these with either a chant or a verse. And this time I will start it with a verse and end it with a verse from Psalm. A Psalm verse. If you'll sign that sheet when you go out to be sure you get notified when we're going to have these other follow-on visits. The Cole Cathedral is January 3rd, and Temple Beth Israel is January 13th.
That'll be confirmed by email.
Yeah, we'll confirm it by email. And we're going to, I would hope to encourage this kind of practice in any interfaith meeting as a starting point. Before the words are spoken, a little brief explanation of how to do it, and then those on a panel pray contemplatively before we start debating. So that's kind of maybe that'll happen in the future. At these other meetings, we'll have the DVD. It's called The Kiss of God from the Song of Sound of the Songs. And Rabbi Zalman said, "Compassionate one, here I am." Keating said, "The love of God cradles us unceasingly." I will hit the gong twice, then say the psalm, and then hit it one more time, and we'll reverse it on the way out. It'll be hit once, then exit psalm, and then twice. It's 20 minutes to 5, so that will put us at our closing time. Is it okay? Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still be. still.